Good afternoon, and welcome to the second episode of the Edge podcast, What They Don't Teach You About Leadership. I'm Izzy, and I'm here with Katie and Chris. And today we're diving into a topic that's at the heart of great leadership, but is often overlooked: communication, or more specifically, how to speak less and say more. In a noisy, fast moving world, especially in hospitality, where there are so many voices, moving parts, and pressures, how we communicate can either build trust, respect, and influence, or alternatively, it can create confusion and disconnect. This conversation is really about what makes communication meaningful, not just functional. And we will be exploring what true communication looks like, how it's changed, and what we as future leaders can do to cut through the noise and connect in more intentional and impactful ways. So, welcome, Chris, Katie, and first question is directly for you, Chris. Obviously, what does true communication mean to you, and how has your understanding of it evolved over time?
Oh, look, it's a really hard one, that one, isn't it? I mean, communication's changed in so many ways over time. And actually, I think, funnily enough, communication is as much about listening and as much about how you behave, strangely, as what you say. There's, you know, there's so much noise around today that often people don't hear what you say, even at the best of times. Um, so, how do you actually communicate? And actually, that's often much more nowadays about how you behave behave with people and how you listen to people. And in fairness, it's not wrong. I mean, there's so much communication nowadays coming out that you hear so many messages that if you go back to 1990, it was such a different world where you had post and you may have got, I don't know, 5 or 6 letters a day. And you had telephone messages, etc. You had time to reflect, you had time to think, and you had time and you were conscious that you had to reply to people. Nowadays, probably everyone expects immediate responses. So it's amazing how often we all get emails from clients wanting a response almost within a couple of hours. And if you don't get it within a couple of hours, they'll complain. But you have no time to actually think, reflect, and consider. So often communication now is about you've got to be accessible, you've got to be open, you've got to be transparent, probably more transparent than ever before. But that's not a bad thing. But you've actually got to listen much more as well.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's about how you can communicate authentically as well, isn't it? I think somehow that kind of gets into it. I think you've got to be yourself as well as coming across like people can trust you.
Yeah, to be fair, there's so much choice now, isn't there? And actually, as we all know, probably most people reply to only partially to their emails for good reason as well, um, because there's so much coming at them. So it is about how do you build trust and relationships in a very different world today. And I don't think that's any different to how it's ever been, actually, weirdly. I think it's still about personal connection and communication to people and how you build relationships. But maybe it's more about how you behave as much as it is what you say.
So, do you think the way we communicate today, especially in digital spaces, has made us better or worse at truly listening and connecting?
Um, there's always a danger. I just sound like an old man, isn't there? Um, I'd actually argue worse. I think it makes people lazy as well. And what I mean by that, it's amazing how many people don't network now and don't put themselves out there because they think that their digital connections will do the work for them. I think,
Mm.
but actually, people hate networking, which I get. People hate walking into a room where they don't know people, which simplistically, of course, I think anyone would understand. But that isn't networking. Networking is actually listening to what other people say, building relationships, and about understanding what other perspectives are going on in the marketplace, which you can only do by putting yourself out there. And actually, that was a much more accepted norm in the days before digital because you had to, as such. Now you don't because you've got all the information coming to you. So it shifts things quite a lot. So it is making the effort. You've got to make more effort, I think, now in some ways, because it's too easy just to assume you've got all the information coming at you.
Yeah, that's true. But then would you say that, do you think it's got worse because of remote working then, where people feel like they can just sit back a bit more, network less, and it's waiting for the world to come to them a bit?
No, no, I don't. I think remote working is actually a good thing. I think when you look back at commuting and what people had to go through, I think it wasn't always very clever at times. Most people were exhausted by the time they got to work, and then had to work a full day and then travel home, and then people wondered why people were grumpy. It's not really hard, is it? It's not really hard to work out. Um, I think actually the remote working allows people more time to think and reflect and get a work-life balance, which I think is healthy, because productivity had fallen to record lows. Um, and actually, I think what people do forget is over since 2000, the average working day had increased 30%.
Wow, yeah.
So you add in 30% extra onto any person, then they're going to get tired and weary and probably not always behave perfectly. I mean, I think that's just logical and normal. And yet everyone's very critical of it. I think we sometimes we just got to look about what are our structures and are they the best they can be? And actually, even with ourselves, I think we get better out of people by not having to travel and commute, but we communicate more in different ways. So I think it's just trying to work out what the balance is.
Absolutely, because like you say, with the huge amounts of effort that was put towards even just getting to work and then having to go through the work day and then traveling back, of course, burnout was going to happen sooner or later. So now I think with remote working, there are so many positives that allow people to kind of have their own sort of environment and routine, but then also reach out in a more sort of authentic way where they're not just really burnt out all the time. So I think that is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think actually often, I mean, I find it quite interesting when people talk about London sometimes. I was having a conversation earlier today when people were saying, oh, how dangerous it is. Well, maybe, but I'll tell you, it's a lot safer than it was back in the 1980s. No, that is. And actually, it's a lovely city nowadays. And actually, I don't think I ever feel unsafe in London. Um,
I don't think I have ever have actually. No.
So I do. I mean, sometimes people do say things. Actually, the things are evolving, but they're just different now. And I think it is everything's evolving at quite a pace in different ways, and you just got to think about things in different ways now. But actually, I think it's a much nicer place in lots of ways, and I think workplaces are much becoming nicer as well. People are more polite again because people are less stressed and less tired. Um, so it's interesting, but I do think going back to it's all about balance. Everything is about balance, isn't it? Just finding that communication. And sometimes in business, it's really hard to find balance, particularly when there's pressures on.
So
Yeah.
with that in mind, what would you say is the Achilles heel of communication and leadership
Yeah,
today? And how
absolutely.
do you see it play out in practice?
Yeah, I think it is, isn't it? The again, it's a bit unfair, but two points. One, I think one of traditionally, historically, communication used to be about talking at people, talking at your audience. And I think one of the shifts now is you can't talk at anyone. You've got to talk with them and you make a
Mm.
conversation, which goes back to the listening piece I was saying earlier. Um, and talking at anyone doesn't work. And as Izzy will be the first to say, when we're doing invites nowadays, anything long doesn't work.
Mm.
Because people just
Switch off.
people don't want to read. So even any communication now is almost about bullet points. It's not. It's not about. You can't do narratives like you used to, which actually is a shame because actually they'll really enjoy writing letters, long letters. But actually, there's no point because no one's going to read it. So
Yeah.
that's got to shift and change, and you've got to talk with people. And everything has to become conversational now. But leaders don't have time to be conversational with everybody. So it is remarkably difficult for leaders who already got a huge amount coming at them and their workload's grown. How do you communicate? And there's a big shift towards digital communication. I'm not really convinced that does it. What I do think, I think it comes back to how you being visible and how you behave is actually crucial. And I'm not ever saying anyone gets it right all the time. They don't. Everyone fails on it. But I do think it is just being connecting with people in a very maybe quiet way is actually the most important bit. So they know you're there, even if you haven't said anything.
Yeah, it's succinct, isn't it? You have to be short and sweet, direct, straight to the point. Because as you say, if people are getting so much information in all the time, they just want to know what's what they need to do, and kind of move on rather than paragraphs after paragraphs of information that they have to read through. It takes too much time.
Yeah, people just don't want it. They just want bullet points. They just want, if they can read it in 2 lines, if it can be 1 sentence, they'll be happy. Which for someone like, I'm sure, Katie, you have the same problem as I do, because we like writing. Well,
Absolutely, yeah.
I pretend to write. You actually write well. The diff. It is, you want to communicate, but actually you've got to change it to be much more succinct and learn how to listen rather than. And it's again, it's really difficult. It's interesting with Katie. She's a natural observer of life and writes beautifully from an observation point of view, which is a real skill as such, and it makes it very engaging. For me, it's probably it is much more what I call straightforward, and it's about building relationships. And so it's all how you find your own style in this modern world has to change and be different, and just be different. So to me, what's most effective, I find, is actually how you build a personal relationship with someone, how you shake their hand, how you make them feel safe and comfortable, how you listen to what they're saying, even if you don't agree with it, and then go that way.
Yeah, I think that the listening piece is really key, because I mean, how many people would you say you're talking to them, but they're almost thinking of the next point they're going to say? So how easy is it to actually think about what someone's saying to you when you're trying to say, this is what I need to say next, this is what I need to say next, and that means you're actually not listening to somebody?
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. And when you particularly in times of pressure, when you're under pressure, sometimes you haven't got the time to do it, but you have to. But it is the listening skills that I think will influence people more than what you say.
Yeah,
And that's
definitely.
been the big shift. It used to be about what you said. I don't think people really are too concerned about what you said. They like to be provoked. They like to have different ideas expressed. But again, it's about a lot of it's about trust too. Can I trust what this person's saying to me, and are they going to actually be authentic? Now, where it really has improved, we're all candidly honest, and sometimes pre-internet, it wasn't always communication was a bit dodgy at times. Believe me, I've been in many meetings where people fudge the truth, and you sit there going, "Ouch." Now you can't do that because everything's transparent, and you've got to be honest and open. And I think that's a lot better. So I think standards have improved in many, many ways. Honestly, in behaviours, in politeness. I think sometimes we we forget how far we've come. But things are going to carry on changing as well.
So how do you think leaders can almost rewire the way they communicate to obviously create those kind of more meaningful, transformational conversations, if you like, especially under pressure?
Yeah, well, transformational conversations are always more difficult, aren't they? Because very rarely do teams work well under pressure, in truth. And you know that from your sport. It is about how do you actually make someone feel positive and safe, and actually want to perform well, and that comes from within them, not from what you're going to say to them. And I think that's one of the shifts, because it probably used to be much more in alpha days. You felt you could actually, what you said, you could actually influence people. Probably not, but you probably thought you could. Now it's people have more choice, so it's much more about them. And I think the shift from one of the bits that's missing all this conversation, there's been a massive shift from leaders dominating to actually the employee having the power. And the employee today has the power, and the leader has to create a framework for people. And that's not a bad thing at all either. But it creates a different shift in how you have to be as a leader. So it's about how you create a framework to bring the best in communications and best out of people, rather than actually the old day of charging over the hill and hoping people are going to follow you.
And that has to then be that is more challenging, because you almost have to change it according to the person, probably, don't you?
Yeah, you do, but that's
It's
not a bad thing either.
Yeah,
It's not a bad thing. Everyone's different. You two are so different. I mean, but isn't that the lovely thing as well?
Yeah, definitely makes teams more interesting as well. If everyone was the same, it wouldn't be
True.
it wouldn't be very interesting, would it?
No, I think that actually one of the big differences I know is that leaders always have to be accessible.
Yeah.
This is now much harder for people to be switch off or be apart. You have to be accessible. So how you manage that, I think, is quite important.
Yeah. And that makes me want to ask you, how do you manage switching off then, Chris? That's the next question.
Mm.
I think that's where actually that's not me delaying the fudging the question. I think there's a number of ways, aren't there, as such. I think humour is really important. I think internally us having a laugh
Mhm.
becomes even more important, particularly in moments of pressure when we're having our various little moments. I think sport really helps. I mean, I can't say I'm a sport, I'm more a hobbler nowadays than a runner, probably. But I think hobbling around the place, being outside, to me, is what makes me relaxed. Being on the beach, I think it's all the nature. To me, nature is so important. Actually, that's what I found.
And moving makes you feel better. It definitely does.
Actually, it is nature. There's nothing. I never thought I'd say this. I said if I was going to say these words, and I've heard these as a 20-year-old, I would have freaked out. But I love gardens and flowers. I love trees. I mean, all those kind of seeing beautiful nature to me is actually always brings perspective. Being in the mountains when you're going skiing is one of the best ways of getting perspective. Seeing the ocean I mean, to me, actually, nature brings you perspective in a way that nothing in real life does.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the deers, Chris. When you go running and
love
you're running next to deers
I tell
overtaking
you,
you, that
I
bit.
tell you, it is one of the most lovely things in the world when the deers run alongside you. They overtake you and look back
I was
at you.
about to say overtake rather than
Overtake and say, call that running.
got a good image coming on in my head now. Thanks for that. Well, okay,
It's one of the lessons of growing old, I'm afraid. You your body declines, and actually you have to have humor about yourself, because believe me, you can't. What your mind thinks you can do and what your body can do are two different things, and that's not internal communication. It just can't do it anymore. So it just happens.
I think the humor piece is really important and interesting though, because it's kind of letting your own authenticity and your vulnerability out without kind of I just think it's letting more of you show, and it's showing that you are human. And I think that is also quite hard to show and to get across in high pressure situations, especially in work situations where it's sort of more kind of business first. But I think when you bring that humor into it, it's showing that actually everyone is human, everyone has their own struggles, and we can all help each other through it, and we can kind of laugh about it. So I think
Yeah.
that is really important. And it also helps us all to communicate better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people say your vulnerability is what builds trust in others in you, and I do understand that. But I also think if you show vulnerability, people walk over you very quickly. I
It's a
mean,
fine line,
it
isn't
is a
it?
very
Definitely, yeah.
You have to show strength. It is about how do you show strength and vulnerability, but people still think you're strong. The moment people don't think you're strong, they'll back off you 100 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they don't think they are, they are. So it is, which is understandable too, because actually people got busy with their own problems. They don't want to hear anyone else's problems, and they don't always want to see anyone else's vulnerability. So I know people talk about this vulnerability, and I understand it. And but I think it's more about openness and being genuine than vulnerability. If that makes any sense, Katie. And for men, I think that's particularly difficult. I do think that's really difficult to show vulnerability.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. I would say it's much harder. I'm speaking on behalf of, obviously, but I mean, I know for me personally, going back to the laughing humor thing, I feel like it. I mean, laughing makes you feel good, personally. So whether you're in a pressure situation, it can really uplift maybe everything, and you for a moment kind of forget and don't get too bogged down in a negative and go, laugh through it. Maybe it's a dark humor thing, I don't know, but that's probably what I do a lot, isn't it, Chris?
Well, when you laugh, it's normally we've got a problem. Well, I know I've got a problem from the way when you pick up the phone and he's giggling away to yourself. Here we go. So one of your defense mechanisms. But actually, I'd phrase it the other way. If you go into a place and see people laughing, is that professional or unprofessional? I think it's professional. I think people see people laugh. It's a good thing. I think it's a
I
lovely
think
thing.
it's warmth. Laughing
Yeah.
is warmth, isn't it? And it makes you feel probably like you could automatically relax in that person's company, I would think.
I think there's nothing, and it goes back to the communicator, nothing beats a smile, a genuine smile, nothing beats.
Yeah. That makes me think when you go on the tubes in London, there's not many people smiling, is there? Really, when you look around, I do think people can often be on that kind of sardine trip on the tubes, probably thinking, oh, this is a long schlep
There's
from
always, there's always the great, it's funny enough, on the tubes, the great debate is about backpacks.
Is it? I haven't heard this, I don't think.
Only? Well, it
No.
says, why do people get on a tube still wearing their backpack and think that's okay? Because, of course, if it's a busy tube, you're then pushing it into someone's face normally, or pushing it into someone, which actually is not right at all. Why not just take it off? Because it's actually the polite thing to do.
Yeah, actually, no, now you said it, I've seen people take it off and kind of put it between their feet or something, and then
Mm-hmm.
But actually, so if you carry on wearing it, that's what actually really frustrates people, annoys people.
I wouldn't feel comfortable in case someone can get into it as well. I can't see.
Well, there is that. There is
There is
that.
that side.
I assume people think it's okay to wear and just keep wearing too.
Maybe it's because they keep more space. I don't know.
Well, I think it's funny enough. It is often about people's own awareness,
Of others, yeah.
and actually, even in space, what you'll see often when you talk about the tube is that people are just not spatially aware. And I think one of the views is even with the headphones and all the digital communication, people got less spatially aware and think nothing of walking across you or in front of you or anything. But it's not.
Oh, yeah.
It's only because they're not aware. It's not because of anything mean or nasty.
Yeah. Right, we're on to my next question for you, Chris. What are some underused or overlooked habits that help build trust and obviously create a safe environment that we were talking about earlier in teams?
Yeah, the whole thing has changed again over the years. In the old days, we talk about team spirit a lot, and there used to be a whole thing about, actually, in truth, the only time you ever really get team spirit are moments of success.
Mm.
And actually, the more successful, the better the team spirit. It's natural, isn't it? It's all natural. But now it's different because actually there is a greater awareness of individuals, which I think is a good thing. And it's actually about how do you create a safe space for people to communicate and be productive. And, productivity did get to an awful level as such. So it is, how do you actually make people want to enjoy their work? I think we've got to that point now. And that's the shift. It's been a shift from a kind of command and control atmosphere often to a much more a kind of inclusive environment. So I think this is a new environment, and communication has to be completely different. But again, that will come down to how you behave. How you behave.
Mm.
And it's no different to you, is it? Let's turn it on its head, shall we, for a moment? It's about how you communicate to others in the team and to your leaders. And what your expectations are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. With a lot of humour, clearly.
Also, to your coach, you do sports training. So when you're talking to a coach, how do you approach your coach, or what do you want from your coach who's helping train you, improve you?
Yeah, I think again, it comes back to everything we've said so far. You have to be quite succinct. Like if you're in a training session, you can't be stood there for 15, 20 minutes talking about, your technical model or something. You've just got to say, right, okay, go and do this, and you go and do it. Otherwise, you're just wasting a session talking, not doing. So I suppose it's pretty much the same as business.
How about you, Katie?
I think for me, I often struggle to be more open. So I think that's something that I definitely want to work on, because I often struggle getting my points across, I feel like. But actually like letting the other person know what I actually think and what I actually want. So I feel like I have gotten a lot better, but I feel like that's something that I definitely want to focus on. And like you say, it's all about being genuine. So that's something that I definitely want to work towards, I guess.
And the thing is about trust. There is a huge mistrust of other people everywhere, and there is. And I think that's the hardest bit about communication is talking openly and not having trust always. And actually, I think the biggest thing nowadays in teams is how you build a trust across the team is really important.
Yeah.
And actually, what I really admire about people like yourselves nowadays, I never hear you criticize someone else ever. Interestingly, And the same with the other kind of in the team as well. You never hear a personal criticism anymore. It's much more about how they themselves are improving and striving to improve, and how they themselves are growing. It's a bit like a game of sport. You're only against yourself. I don't think that was used to be the case, honestly. I think I think there's a nicer mindset now with young ones. Interestingly, I know everyone says otherwise, and it's more. You can argue it's more self-obsessed or more self-orientated, but actually is far less critical of others, which I think is a really good thing to see.
Yeah, I think that's true actually. I mean, I know speaking for me, when I look at everyone else in the team, all I see is things that others might do better than say I would, because we all have strengths and, if you want to call them weaknesses, we all do have weaknesses. It's not a bad thing to say, but it's appreciating people for the things that they would do better and vice versa, and admitting that's not a weakness either. And it's celebrating everyone for what they do great. That's what a team is to me anyway.
Look, at the end of the day, every business is judged by what it achieves commercially, as such, and that's always the ultimate judge. So it is about how do you actually get a team to be productive commercially, is always the thing. So one of the, again, you can see with Katie's article, she's building a bigger audience all the time. Are people enjoying the articles that Katie writes? That's great to see, because it means the engagement is really good. You can see every time we do an event, people are praising you, Izzy, for how you communicated and acted, and that's what you want to see. Because actually, once you see those personal connections are happening, the business has every opportunity to be successful, and that's the really important bit.
Yeah.
About celebrating sort of how everyone is different and how everyone does communicate differently. And kind of with that in mind, Fellini once said that a different language is a different version of life. And in leadership, how do you think we've learned to truly understand people who think, speak, or express themselves differently? And why do you think it matters?
It's a lot better than it was. Again, it's the same thing. If you go back, I really do sound like an old man, don't I? If you go back, I mean, there was a reason why it's called Little Britain. And sometimes mindsets were remarkably narrow-minded, and people didn't listen, and people had very fixed mindsets. I think nowadays there is a global mindset. There is much more broad mindsets everywhere, from young through to old. And I think people have learned to listen to different perspectives. And in terms of the communication, and one of the great things now is you can get different perspectives expressed, and you can go and explore it. So you can have a view, you can put it into Google, and you'll get different views come back at you, which actually I find is really helpful sometimes when you're trying to understand the situation. And you can't impose anymore. So you can't just impose. You've got to have weighed up arguments in everything you do. So I think I think we have become global. I think we've got far broader perspective. I think we've got more understanding of different issues. But I think one of the real funs is this whole thing about growth mindset, which is about listening to different things. And I think if you don't have growth mindset now, it's a bit like the network. If you don't do that, you can't be successful, because the only way to adapt to all the problems that come at you is by listening and learning. And I think the problems come at you in any business now have magnified and got greater. It used to be a crisis every decade. Now it seems like a crisis every other year or every year. So how you handle that and how you change that, you need to be listening the whole time. So I think different perspectives is incredibly healthy to listen to, and I think it's really good. But you're right, it can be a different language at times.
So with that sort of in mind, because I think it is a different language, but that can be sometimes really hard to communicate sort of authentically and efficiently. So have you ever communicated something with the best intentions, only for it to then land completely differently? And did you take anything away from that sort of experience?
A good question.
A million times over. A million times over. But actually, the one which I remind, which actually I think is probably pertinent, is literally the night after Trump won the presidential election.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the reaction in the team to his winning was, shall we say, it was emotional. I think it did impact on people in quite an emotional way. So I guess the kind of more pragmatic approach probably wasn't wasn't a thing of the moment. I think it's fair to say, but it actually is really interesting. And I think that what I'm trying to say, Katie, badly maybe, is I think if you talk about different languages, I mean, people do struggle to understand Trump, where he's coming from, his perspectives, and I'm sure people like yourself would struggle with that, to understand that. And I think a lot of people struggle on it. And I think that becomes what's most challenging when someone who's so powerful has views that are so alien to what you believe.
Hmm.
I think that makes life incredibly hard for people. And actually, for a lot of people who have high ideals, it makes it very actually I wouldn't say depressing, but it brings a shadow over what they believe. So how do you get equality? How do you find diversity? How do you find a whole range of things that suddenly life seems to be saying the opposite to, or power seems to be saying the opposite to? So I think whichever way in life, and even if you look at, it's not being political at all, whichever way, trying to understand what's going on in the world seems to get harder and harder
Yeah, definitely.
all the time. So again, it goes back to, I think, your previous question is trying to at least understand different perspectives to try and get an understanding of what's going on. Otherwise, I think it does get very difficult. I think it does get quite difficult.
It's trying to put yourself in other people's shoes as well. I think that ties into it, doesn't it? Because it's so obvious to yourself from your perspective, having a standpoint on something, say like Trump, but you do have to ask yourself what others are seeing when they sit on the opposite side of the fence to say, you on one side, because there's rationale to it, isn't there? It's trying to look into what it is.
Well, it's trying to understand rationale. You're right. Even if you can't, it's trying to at least respect it.
Yeah, exactly.
But sometimes that can be remarkably difficult. And one of the things we talk about a lot is people's expectations are so high in what we do sometimes.
Mm.
Now, is that right or is that wrong?
It's a
Actually,
compliment.
well, it is a compliment in some ways. There's an old phrase that pressure is a privilege.
Yeah.
If people have high expectations of you, actually, that is a compliment and an honor. Although it never feels that way when you're feeling under the cosh. Um,
Hmm.
so it's all about perspective, and it's trying to find the right perspective. And that can be really hard. That can be really, really hard. But I think nowadays you've got to have a calmness of mind, or try to get to a calmness of mind that allows you to see. Because the one thing I've learned, everyone has a comment or a criticism to make, and that's absolutely their right. However, they don't always see the picture. So how do you? But is that a problem? Is that a problem? No, not of course not. But it's how you communicate yourself has to get better and better the whole time.
Yeah.
It's about sort of, if you are communicating with someone who has a different view on something, not trying to dissuade them out of why they think that, but like respecting that and then trying to then sort of collaborate some kind of communication from that rather than just immediately going into the conversation at odds with each other, because that can be then really hard to move forward and to make something from that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And actually, other people's perspective is really good. I mean, it always used to amaze me in the old days how people always said, "I vote Tory" or "I vote Labour," or "I'm certainly I won't budge from it." Um, and to me, that's not right. You got to budge. You got to move what you believe at that moment in time.
Of course,
Especially,
yeah, otherwise it just becomes like an echo chamber. And if your beliefs aren't constantly like evolving and changing, then your environment won't change or evolve either.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So, I was probably a Tory, and then I was also a Blairite. Then, I mean, where you stand, I'm very a centralist, but shifting your position and shifting your perspective is a good thing to listen to.
Mhm.
Um, and it is really interesting. It is really interesting.
I think your perspectives can change throughout different phases of your life as well. I know that's tends to be the case anyway. So, but then that's where people maybe do what they call tribal voting, isn't it? It's almost like what they've always done. So, irrespective of kind of what's being, you know, promised, if you like, they'll still continue to
I
vote.
think I think that goes back to the communication piece, right back to the heart of it. I think in the UK we've always been traditionally tribal. I think we're
Yeah.
less tribal now. So if you go back to 30 years, you were a northerner or a southerner. It's almost everything was badging.
Yeah.
You supported this football club or whatever. You were Tory or you were Labour. You don't get that nowadays. The badging has stopped, and actually, all the traditional barriers you are a mixture of everything, And I think that's lovely to see. And culturally, you're accepted much more, whether you're a Liverpudlian or a Glaswegian or wherever. It is now the whole mix that becomes important, rather than just where you originated from and what that origin story was, and you have to stay true to it.
Would you say that people almost pigeonhole you still for, say, your job roles? Would you argue? Or is that less so now than ever?
Yeah, that's all. In fairness, that's always been the argument. People always argue that that you need to have business cards and a title. I've always argued the opposite. Actually, I
Yeah.
don't think it. I think it's how you behave.
Mhm.
It's one, and actually, consultancy is a really interesting one, because consultants always argue that they can't write articles often, or because they're giving away their knowledge, which is their asset.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, no one's doing rocket science. Unless you're doing rocket science, that knowledge base is probably found somewhere else. What people actually buy is, do I want to work with this person as my advisor? So it goes back to actually communications, the crucial bit, not your knowledge base. We give knowledge away all the time in terms of how we behave, because we write those articles and giving knowledge away all the time. I don't think I've got anything left not to give. But actually, what I count on is actually people want to come and explore, because they understand how we think and what we do. So to me, it's all about communication. It's all about how you behave as a human being. Funnily enough, good or bad, that's what makes you a good communicator.
Mhm. So then there's
That's it.
a last question, Chris, to wrap it up. How do you personally decide when to speak and when to hold back?
Well, I don't seem to get a choice.
I knew there was going to be some comment that came out of that one.
I think it's the other way around. How about phrasing it onto you? I think it's about time, isn't it? How do you feel open to not just generally with clients and things? How do you feel open to talk and be yourselves?
Do you mean as in when I'm talking to people or when people are talking to me?
Either, really. I suppose when people talk to you, but either, really.
I again find when people are really honest and when people don't hold themselves back, like so when they don't put up sort of a mask, which is really hard, or when they don't put up sort of a facade, because I feel like I really struggle to do that. I kind of put the like business face on, which I suppose you have to do to a certain extent, but then also wanting to let the more genuine side come out is really difficult. So I feel like when people don't when people I'm talking to sort of let themselves shine through, I find that so much more open. And I'm like, oh, this is definitely somewhere I can be more of myself and say more of what's on my mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I do. I think that's absolutely. It's about to being the genuine, authentic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How about you, Is?
In terms of people yeah, if people are just being completely honest and open with me, I receive that much better personally. But in terms of for me, when to hold back, it's a hard one, really. I think it is situational. Katie's right, because you do have to kind of, as I say, read the room on certain things and know
Mm.
when you could be not overstepping a mark, but know where you should sit on it and whether it has to be a support situation or, you know, understand maybe how the other person's feeling to make them feel heard as well in a situation and allow them to speak rather than you necessarily going, well, I need to speak now. You know, it's always judging the situation and how much you need to give, I think.
How about hosting events?
What about them? Hosting events. We should ask you about that, Chris. You're the hoster. Not me.
How about when you're in front of an audience? Because you're more. It is that bit, isn't it, about how you manage that as well.
Oh, in front of an audience, I don't think I think anymore. I think that's where it would all go Pete Tong, to be honest. That's where the nervousness would come out if there's a crowd. It's fine when it's more one-on-one, I think. Whereas if you're hosting an event, it's very much about kind of bridging between certain sections of the event and kind of being that welcoming feel rather than speaking too much, if that makes sense.
And Katie, when you're writing an article, what do you
Mm-hmm.
focus on when you're communicating? Because you write beautiful articles. So what do you
Do I
focus?
focus on? I feel like because in sort of more like spoken word communication, like when I'm speaking to someone, I feel like I'm more likely to hold back then. But then when I'm writing articles, I feel just more comfortable with that because there's more time and there's more space. So I feel then I'm more able to actually open up and speak my mind. Um, and because like Izzy kind of touched upon that, when nerves come into it, your mind kind of goes blank. And that's how it is for me. It sounds very extreme, but almost in any conversation, that's how it is for me. So I feel like then when I'm writing, that's just not there at all. So then I can
Mm.
kind of
Think
be more
clearly
open.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So is writing your freedom? Because that's what I find about
Yeah,
writing.
for sure. Yeah,
'Cause people,
absolutely.
yeah, because people criticize my writing, but actually it's my way of relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
It's my way of switching off. But it's losing yourself in another world.
That's
Absolutely, yeah.
that's why we get 4 articles when Chris is on a 4-hour train.
You should worry about it. You should worry. It's when I write childhood stories for the grandkids or the daughters. Just get told off.
Maybe we should do a special article on one of those one day, Chris.
No, you really don't want to.
Are you sure? Okay.
I did it to my granddaughter, and she just said, "Well, that's a bit boring, wasn't it?"
Didn't send her to sleep enough.
I don't think there's enough about her in the story. I think that's what it was, apparently.
Oh, okay, fair enough. You can
So
work.
I'll try and improve. I will try and improve.
Well, I think that was really, really interesting. Thank you, Chris. I mean, we managed to get some questions to us there as well, which wasn't necessarily part of the plan.
Yeah,
But
wild cards coming in all of a sudden.
I know, yeah. Chris had that up his sleeve the whole time, Katie. We just had no idea. That was really interesting and, all about strong communication and building trust and expressing yourself and being clear. And I think the main one for me is it's about how you build connections with people, because I think that does sit at the heart of business and all walks of life, how important that is.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank
Pleasure.
you so much.
My pleasure. Thank
Hope
you.
you enjoyed being quizzed.
Well, I enjoy the quizzing.
That's what I thought.
The tables have turned.
And I feel as though as we go into episode 3 next time, there might be a few more questions coming our way, Katie. So be prepared.
I'll get ready for it.
Stop this.